Hello, everyone. What follows is a 30-minute recording I'm going to play for you that's pulled out of a 2.5, almost 3 hour roundtable that I had yesterday with Derek Lambert, host of Myth Vision podcast, and Dr. Kipp Davis. And we had a great time. And you can find the entire program on Derek's channel and Kipp's channel if you want to hear it all. But I've just pulled this 30-minute presentation out, and it's going to have a part one. And then part two is the discussion mainly between Kipp and between me. Derek jumps in as well. So our topic has to do with the advantages of taking a critical historical reading of our New Testament Gospels. And what we say and what we lay out could be true of any text. But I take Mark, which I believe was the first written New Testament gospel, and then Matthew. And since Matthew uses 90% of Mark as a source, we can actually see how one writer using another writer makes changes and adaptations and so forth, and ask why things are different, rather than just pushing them all together and harmonizing, as it's called, in quotes. It actually destroys them because you tend to lose them all then. So just give me 30 minutes, and I think I can convince you of not only that Mark wrote first, a lot of people want to argue about that, but that we can clearly see the editing hand of the author of Matthew and learn a lot from it. And we don't want to miss that. So here is a historical, critical reading of some key passages in Matthew and Mark. Enjoy.
Welcome back to Myth Vision, Dr. Kipp Davis's YouTube channel, and of course, this will make an appearance on Dr. James D. Tabor's YouTube channel. You're going to want to stay tuned. We're going for the jugular. We are wanting to give you what Mark is saying in the Gospel of Mark, what Matthew is saying in the Gospel of Matthew. I am being hype and emphasizing this because they do not say the same things everywhere. And then let's read them side by side. So let me introduce you to our guest today. Really, I'm their guest, depending on which channel you're watching this from. Dr. James D. Tabor, Dr. Kipp Davis, and Derek Lambert, host of Myth Vision. I figure we would start right out the gate, not wasting anyone's time. Quick promo: subscribe to both of their YouTube channels, Dr. Kipp Davis, Dr. YouTube Tabor.
Might as well be, right?
I know. I'm trying to get right into this because there's too much to talk about today. Dr. James D. Tabor, go sign up MVP courses. Both of them have courses. I guarantee you there's going to be stuff in the future as well. If you haven't taken them, be sure to do so. Without further ado, I'm going to be a fly on the wall with the rest of the audience, keeping track of like super chats, comments, things like that, and allowing Dr. James Tabor to kind of lead the way, bringing up some visuals, and Dr. Kipp will interact with him. So, Dr. Tabor.
Okay, good to see you all. Welcome, everybody. Just one preliminary statement, and then I want to really demonstrate it with the visuals. That's, this is show and tell. We're going to go through the visuals quickly and have as much as 45 minutes to an hour then to analyze and talk about them. But the one thing I want to say that I'll just put out there in a kind of a controversial way, because you don't hear this so much from, say, very conservative or sincerely fundamentalist readers of the New Testament who want to respect the Gospels. I think that is their true motive in most cases, if they are sincere, and that is to read them carefully. And if you don't read them carefully and you think that it's a challenge of harmonization, okay? Harmonization is the enemy of the truth. So let's get started. And what I want you to note is a method that I'm using. I think I can convince you. I've done this for years with my students, and I get students, very sincere Bible-believing students. They do fine when we go through this because they open their minds, they listen, and they realize that the approach we're using actually has more credibility than the gerrymandering approach that apologists also use, because they're not interested in the text as much as making it say something so it's not a problem. Well, we like problems, not because, we want to be troublesome, but because we want to solve the problems. We want to say, oh, wow, that's interesting. So let's go. And we're going to go fast. So don't think, boy, they're just buzzing through these, because the idea is put it before you and then we can discuss it. So slide number 1 here. This is a so-called harmony of the Gospels, but that's not what it's really called. It's called Gospel Parallels by Throckmorton. It's in the public domain, so you don't even have to buy it. If you Google Throckmorton Gospel Parallels, you can get this actual book free of charge. And I hope you'll study it to your heart's content. Now, back off a little, Derek, because this is more of a visual. We're not going to read all of this. Okay. Notice something here, and you can't notice it without a slide like this. I don't care how much you read the Bible. It all kind of merges into your head, and it's like, let's see, did Mark say, oh, yeah, and Luke added that. Oh, yeah, I forgot. And Matthew has that. That's not what you need. Here's what you need. Just look at the slide visually. This is the account in Mark 6, 17 through 29 of the death of John. What do you notice as Matthew rewrites it? Now, you could say, well, what do you mean, Dr. Tabor? Matthew rewrites it. What if Matthew wrote first and Mark's filling it out? That's a possibility, theoretically, but it doesn't hold up when you look at the content. Now, Matthew is good at this, let me tell you. He's very good at it. Look how dense Mark's account is. Look at that. We're not going to read it. You know the story about the birthday party and all of this, and John being brought in, a banquet, and Herodias' daughter, and so forth. But if you read Mark, it's very, very full. People think Mark is shorter. Look at that. Is Mark shorter? I don't think so. Count the words. But if you start skimming Matthew, you'll see. Let's just go to verse 7, just as an example. And though he wanted to put him to death, he feared the people because they held him to be a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, blank, 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 the daughter of Herodias died. Blank. So we go on through, and I just want you to get that visual. Now, what does that tell us? That tells us, here's a great example of, I'm going to give you the case that Mark wrote first, and now Matthew is rewriting it in a kind of a Cliff Notes version. I really think it is that. Most of the essential stuff is there, but it's more like, hey, here's the story. John got his head cut off, and, let's go on and move on to Jesus, who's also going to get killed. Okay, next slide. These will accumulate. You'll see the effect in a minute as we go through. And notice we're being careful with the text. We're letting the text decide. Now, here we're going to look at the baptism of Jesus. Now, here we're going to see that Matthew does not shorten it. He lengthens it. But I'm going to go with the working hypothesis that look at the middle column down at the bottom of the first page, the baptism of Jesus, Mark 1, 9 through 11.
Can I zoom in on that?
Yes. Yeah, you can zoom in just so you can show both. Yeah, that's good. But Mark's only one line. Now, what's the problem here? Mark doesn't care about whether Jesus is sinned or not sinned. Remember, this is a baptism for remission of sins. Matthew's writing later, and he's going, Mark didn't really address something. So anyone reading this could say, well, I'm really glad Matthew came along and addressed it. But just keep in mind that Mark doesn't mention it. Now, there's nothing wrong with mentioning it, except Matthew is concerned that somebody might think Jesus is a sinner. I wonder why Mark isn't concerned with that. Now go to the other column. Okay. And here we need Luke too, because we're going to put Luke as a control. When you do an experiment, you have a control. What we're asking is, how does Matthew rewrite his source Mark? So here you see he adds this, like, oh, I can't baptize you. You should baptize me. And Jesus said, let's go ahead with it to fulfill righteousness. Okay, now let's look at the voice. Every movie I've ever seen follows Matthew. Every preacher I've ever heard from the pulpit follows Matthew. Why? Because it's a loudspeaker announcement. This is my beloved son with whom I'm well pleased. Tell the world. Do you realize if Mark put that in, his whole gospel would fall apart? Because in Mark, nobody knows who Jesus is. That's his. So Matthew doesn't care about the secret. Now you say, well, maybe the voice said both. You see what you're doing there? It's going to get worse as we go on. Hey, I have no idea what the voice said, but according to Mark, a voice came from heaven and said, "You are my beloved son. With you I am well pleased." It's personal. Now notice our control. Luke also has Mark. He has no problem with that. Look what he puts. You are my beloved son. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, right? Okay, look at Matthew. Matthew does have a problem with it because he's not interested in the secret. He's already told you Jesus is the Christ and given the genealogy and everything. Okay, next. This is going to accumulate. You're going to begin to see a pattern here. Okay, this is my favorite. Oh, they're all my favorite, but this one is just great. Notice again the visuals. Go to the middle column first. This is an incident in Mark early on, chapter 2, picking ears of grain on the Sabbath. The issue is technically, can you harvest on the Sabbath according to Jewish law? The Pharisees say no. Harvesting and reaping is one of the things forbidden in Pharisaic tradition. And the disciples are picking grain on the Sabbath. Now, they get criticized, like, look at verse 2. Why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? So Matthew has that, although he adds that they're hungry. Notice a little bit of human need coming in there. But if you notice how Mark handles it, he basically says, oh, you think we're breaking the law? Yeah, actually, we're just kind of following David. He broke the law. Did you know that he went into we're going to worry about who was high priest here. Notice Matthew takes out Abiathar. That's a detail. That's because Abiathar wasn't the high priest. And you go, oh, wow, he made a mistake there. But what is he concerned with? He's concerned with, okay, David broke the law. So notice what Jesus is saying. If you can get both columns in for a minute, just move it over a little, okay, Derek, or reduce it. You're good at this. Now, notice Mark wants to put this in your lap and say, go figure it out. Mark wants you to have a problem with this. Picture it like this. You say, Tabor, you broke the law. And I go, oh, really? Yeah, David broke the law. Actually, I guess I broke the law. You see, he doesn't try to explain it. And then look at the ending, which notice in the second column, Matthew does not like and removes. Why doesn't he like it? Because he makes a totally different point. I'll get to Matthew in a minute.
Are we talking about the upper right hand? Upper right hand?
Right hand, upper right hand. Okay. I can actually see your cursor. Yep.
You're talking about
and he said to them, look, after he said, David broke, I broke the law. David broke the law. But let me tell you this, the Sabbath is made for people. I'm going to say people. The Sabbath's made for people, for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Son of Man can mean a human being. And in this context, I think it does. Now, Jesus is a human being. So he's saying, I'm a human being. My disciples are human beings. And we're allowed to do this. Why? Because the Sabbath is for good. Now, Matthew might believe that, but he decides to give another idea. It's so different. Look, he takes that out. He doesn't put the Sabbath was made for man. Now, here's our first example where harmonization would go so far wrong. Think of squeezing Matthew and Mark together. Okay, just go like this, like an accordion. You see what happens? Okay, you get Sabbath was made for man, but you don't get him removing it, so you have lost Matthew. And he doesn't have anything about, well, why is Jesus doing this? Matthew gives a totally different reason. Look at the top, Derek, of Matthew, of the second column, verse 5. He gives that first example of David, and then he goes, and what about the temple? Priests work on Saturday in the temple more than any other time, and it's no big deal. Why?
Here, right?
Why? Because someone greater than the temple is here. You see what he's doing? He's saying the reason Jesus is okay because he is greater than even the temple. There's the authority of Jesus. Whereas Mark is saying the reason it's okay is because of the original meaning of the Sabbath. Notice again, Luke takes that out, but I think it's not because he doesn't particularly like it as much as his people aren't into these kind of what we call halakhic arguments, about Jewish law and so forth. So he just says, hey, Jesus said it, don't worry. Okay, next. Okay, this is really great. You're going to love this one. What is the most difficult passage in Mark? Probably Mark 4:10-12. And when he was alone, those who are about him asked him, why are you speaking in parables? And he said, to you, this is the disciples, is given the secret of the kingdom of God. Okay, notice Matthew put secrets. So there's not just one secret. Wait a minute, there's a lot of secrets, right? But for those outside, everything is in riddles. Parable in this case means a riddle. I'm not going to tell you the real thing. You got to figure it out. So that they may indeed, whoa, wait a minute. Look over to the left, Derek, verse 13. This is why I speak in parables, because seeing they do not see. You see what he's done? Mm-hmm. This is Bible difficulty 101 with Mark. What does the Sunday school teacher say? Teacher, why does Jesus say he doesn't want people to understand and be forgiven? I thought he did. He goes, oh, he didn't mean that. What he meant was they don't see, and therefore, they're fulfilling the prophecy of Isaiah about hard-hearted people that don't have the right spirit. But notice Mark says, no, they can't see. It's a test. In other words, you throw something out and it's a test. And notice Luke again. Look what Luke says. So that seeing they may not see. Do you see how Luke is a control? When somebody says, oh, well, maybe Matthew wrote first and then Mark made it more difficult, it almost always goes the other way. If something's missing, you saw about the Sabbath made for man, something is not clear, Matthew's going to solve it for you. He does it with the Q source, the to source. He does it all the time. I'll just throw this out just orally. It's not Mark. Do you remember that? Don't think I came to bring peace, but a sword and so forth. And you got to hate your father, mother, brother, sister, and so forth. Matthew says, that just means you should love God more than other people. But that isn't what the original said. It said you got to hate them. You see what's happening? Yep. Matthew's the great harmonizer, or he likes to go through problems and make them easy. Okay, next. And Luke tends to follow Mark, except, as you're going to see now, when he really doesn't want to follow Mark either. And that's what we have here. I'm sorry to laugh, but I mean, really, if you harmonize these, you've lost them all. And we're going to go over that at the end. You've lost them all. You don't have Mark. You don't have Matthew. You don't have Luke. Isn't that a tragedy if you care about the scriptures? Okay, here is a great one. This just blows me away. It's the first time Jesus is confessed. Look at the left side first, depending on how you're looking at it, the way we're looking at it. Jesus pops the question.
I also really like this one.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Who do men say that I am? And Peter, the great revelation. Look at the last verse there in that column. You are the Christ. And Matthew even emphasizes that more. You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Luke has a little bit different phrasing, but basically it's about the same. Now, go over to the other page, Derek, and all of a sudden, when you see this, you should have little flashing lights that go off and go, ooh, he usually shortens and abbreviates, but now he's putting a huge chunk of stuff in. And the reason he's doing that, let's go back to Mark, verse 30. Go on down, Derek. No, back, same column, verse 30. Go to the middle column. Right after Peter confesses, just stay with Mark, because I believe that's the original text of this story. He charged them to tell no one about them, and he began to teach them he's going to suffer and be killed and rise again. Look, notice verse 32. And Peter took him and began to rebuke him. What? And then Jesus turns and rebukes Peter and calls him Satan and says he's not even on God's side. Whoa. Okay, Matthew, to his credit, leaves that in. But look what he adds. Verse 17, up at the top of Matthew, second page. And Jesus answered, blessed are you. Yeah, before I curse you, I want you to know that you're in charge of the church and you're the Pope and everything, and whatever you say is it. Roman Catholic reading, excuse me. But you see my point? Now here's Luke. He's my favorite. He goes,
is this a case of like, when I'm like managing people in the past, I always give them compliments before I like give them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's looking at Mark and he's thinking, yeah, that is there. I don't want to take that out. He sort of respects Mark on some levels, but he wants to retell it or construct, just like the picking grain on the Sabbath. But he's not above taking it out if it's going to be a problem. You do not go around and tell people, oh, you want to know how to keep the Sabbath? Just do human good. That is not a good Jewish way to decide how to keep the Sabbath. Okay, so what does he do? Look at Luke. I love this. He just goes, I am not even stepping into that tangled mess.
Yeah.
I can see Matthew. I can see Luke. I'm just taking it all out and saying, hey, Jesus is going to suffer. Let's move on. You see that? No curse, no blessing, nothing. Now, you say, but Dr. Tabor, I want to know like what really happened. I'm going to put them all together. You just lost them all. You see that? You lost them all. First, you don't have Luke. Luke doesn't put that. Say, yeah, but Mark has some of it and Matthew has some, and I'm going to have it all now. No, you've created a new gospel. You have created the gospel according to whatever your name is, Joe Blow. So now you've created the gospel according to Joe Blow. Mark didn't, that's not Mark's gospel. That's not Matthew's story. That's not Luke's story. Next. And then we're going to get into talking about the implications of this.
Right.
Is this the sixth one?
Yep. Why do you call me good?
Oh, yeah. This one is good. Okay. And again, do you see how Luke helps us tremendously? Like a control, almost like, okay, here's Mark. Ooh, what is Matthew going to do with that? Ooh, what did Luke do? Oh, I see. He stayed with Mark, and he does. Now, what's the problem? The problem is, let's read the first two verses of Mark. And as he was setting out on his journey, a man ran up and knelt before him and asked, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said to him, why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. You know the commandments. He just basically quoted the Shema and said, keep the commandments. Talk about good Judaism. What's the core of Judaism? God is one. God alone. Notice, God alone. That's the refrain all through the book of Isaiah. I am the Lord. There's none beside me. I'm the Lord, and so forth. And keep the commandments. Now, we're not going to get into the commandments and go sell all you have. That's the point of the story. But what I want you to notice is, why does Matthew have a problem with this? Are you kidding? Jesus, you can't even call Jesus good, and yet I'm going to end my gospel and say he has all authority in heaven and on earth, and you're to baptize in his name, and unless people come through him, there's no hope. Of course he's good. He's much more than good. He's very good. He's divine. He's the Son of God, born of a virgin. Okay, look at this. Why do you ask me about what is good? Well, I guess he asked him about what is good, but that's not what Mark has. Come on. Why do you ask me? One there is who's good. Well, that doesn't even make sense. Why are you asking me about good? Only God is good. So I can't ask you about good because God is good? Doesn't even make sense. First of all, it's badly done, wouldn't you say? Not to be critical here. Okay, look at Luke. He just keeps it. Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. So that, to me, again, illustrates the same point over and over and over. When we have three accounts, let's start back at the first. When we have two accounts, Mark and Matthew, Matthew's going to tend to abbreviate unless he has a problem. If he has a problem, he's going to pop in something that mitigates the problem, right? Like, well, priests can work because of the temple on the Sabbath, and Jesus is greater than the temple, so his disciples can work because they're serving him, and he's greater than the temple. Mark doesn't say anything like that, not even close. That's not his reason. Same here with Luke. So there you get the principles. If we just take those, it's really 6 examples, 5 from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You can see, to me, it's incontrovertible that the text is moving from Mark to Matthew re-editing to Luke. And problem number one that so many fundamentalists do, and they're sincere, I think, in many times. I'm not sure all apologists are sincere, but I think many Bible readers are sincere. I was sincere. You were sincere. Kipp was sincere. I mean, we got on our knees and loved the Lord with all our heart, and still do in some understandable way. You know, in others, we want to follow the truth. And the motives can be very good. So we're not insulting people here. What we're asking is respect the text and read them carefully. And critical does not mean criticize, tear down. What did I tear down? I didn't tear down one thing as I went through. I chuckled a little bit because I can't get over how Matthew just jumps in there. Oh, well, you know, but you know, if you go to Matthew's time, of course, he's going to push the idea of Jesus being good and great and greater than the temple. There's not a temple anymore. And he's trying to kind of forge a whole new religion that we know as Christianity. Mark is on the cusp of a little of that, but he still wants to keep it pretty sharp and pretty raw. And Luke sometimes follows Mark, other times he doesn't. But I didn't give you many examples of Luke. If we were doing Luke, you know what he does most of the time? Problem, remove. Problem, remove. Don't even discuss it. Like when Jesus tells the disciples, you know, you don't understand. How are you ever going to understand anything? Take it out. Just don't even go through it. So he's not going to rewrite. Luke's not going to rewrite material in Mark that's too problematic. Matthew will tend to keep it, but then mitigate it with something he wants to say. So what I say is let each one have its own voice. We do that when we speak. We have 3 people here now, and you're letting me speak. You know, you're not interrupting me. You're not saying, "Oh, you know." Why are we doing that with the Gospels of all things? Why are we doing it with any text? That's the scientific, responsible historical study of the Bible. And once you get into it, you can end up believing what you want. You know, I mean, what you decide is your faith is your faith. But don't violate the integrity of the text that you claim you're respecting by essentially getting rid of all of them. And that's actually what happens. You know, when preachers get up, I grew up in the Church of Christ. And how many times I got my Bible here, my black leather Bible. I get up in the pulpit and I go, okay, we want to consider Jesus' baptism today. Why don't we look at Matthew today? Let's go. And you go, what do you mean? Why don't we look at Matthew? Like what? He's kind of my favorite. Why do we want your favorite? This is what people do. I kind of like the way Luke puts this. Oh, do you? What is it? I mean, you should not get up and be teaching people, you know, your proclivities and your leanings. You should get up and say, here is the text. I think sermons should be slides like this. And then what a great discussion you could have. Why did Jesus allow his disciples to pick grain on the Sabbath? One idea Mark had was because, you know, the Sabbath should really be for human good. We find that in rabbinic sources, right? Another, it's more Hillel, if you know Hillel. What would Shammai say? I'm with Matthew. Actually, he wouldn't be with Matthew because he doesn't think Jesus is greater than the temple, but he'd love that thing about, oh, the priests. Well, it's the temple. Come on. Of course they can work on the Sabbath. So that's my spiel, and I'm sticking to it.